Hey watercolor wizards, Hajra here. Today I'll be doing a laid-back, informative video reviewing this Moleskine Pocket storybook notebook and also introducing you to Gestalt principles, which are very useful to anything including visual design and layout. Thanks for parking your brushes here and let the epic art adventures begin. So I got this notebook in February of 2015 to use for thumbnails, and that was a while back. I got it for about $13, and this is a pocket-sized version, and that's 3.5 inches wide and 5.5 inches tall. And you can also get this in the 5.25 by 8.25 inches size, but it's actually tough to find now, and it's not as readily available as other types of Moleskine notebooks. And it has a traditional black hardcover with the rounded corners, the leather-like finish, and it's sturdy and thread bound, everything that you'd expect from Moleskine. It also has its little cloth ribbon bookmark in here that you can use to mark your place, and it's got the elastic strap closure, which I've seen on all of the Moleskine art journals and other art journals as well that are for travel. And it also has a convenient interior pocket where you can put loose papers. And this is a portrait vertical orientation versus the horizontal landscape orientation, which would open the other direction. And this has 80 total pages in it, and this is sketch paper, not watercolor paper, so you can draw with graphite in it and use marker or color pencil or crayon or gel pens. So all sorts of dry media is probably going to be okay, but not wet media. And I guess you can push it with a little bit of water and wet media, but it's really not meant for that. This is sketch paper. If you want something where you want wet media, then get the Moleskine watercolor journal. And I got this because it is a unique storyboard format in here, which again I thought would be cool for doing thumbnails and such. So the first 40 pages have these two larger frames on each page, and that means you can do larger thumbnails, and there's a little bit of space for notes in the margins, and I guess you can also rotate it and do your thumbnails in this direction. Now when you get past the first 40 thumbnails, you're going to get to these smaller thumbnails. The next 20 pages all have these 4 smaller storyboard frames on them, and there's more space for notes here, definitely if you want a bigger thumbnail with less notes or a smaller thumbnail with more notes. And sometimes thumbnails can be super rough and simple, so you don't really need that much space. So I did think that was really cute, and I got it 5 years ago since it would be adorable for thumbnails, and I do like to make thumbnails for original art layouts. But I've only managed to use it in the past by pasting some of my old watercolor thumbnails from a past picture book in here. I did these thumbnails on Arches paper, and then I thought, okay, I can glue them into here and it'll motivate me to do the rest of my thumbnails in here. But it never really happened because these thumbnails were cute, but most of my thumbnails are super ugly, being too cute and pretty to use just for like really rough thumbnails. So I had an idea, do a really simple layout or composition principle or rule here, and then write the notes or the label here. And along those lines, I recently did a post on Patreon discussing Gestalt principles and Cole's Phillips Fadeaway Girls that utilized Gestalt principles, and then that's what made me think that that would be a great start to breaking in this notebook. And I've also done past posts on layout and composition on Patreon, including a giant monster post on backgrounds, stylized backgrounds, and no backgrounds, plus all my deconstructed art posts discuss layout and composition, which you can scroll down and find in my complete public index of all of my Patreon posts, divided by category, so I hope some of you check that out. So Gestalt means unified whole in German, and it's a visual theory asserting that what we see and perceive is not solely with our eyes, but also interpreted and influenced by our minds. The influence of our minds affects color perception as well. You might recall the blue or gold striped dress controversy, where different people saw different colors in that dress, whether it was a blue dress or a gold dress, or sometimes a blue dress and sometimes a gold dress, which is what happened to me. So just as our minds color perception, our minds also shape perception. So basically our minds crave meaning and thus attempt to self-organize any visual elements, even random, chaotic, or unclear elements, into organized patterns, related groups, and meaningful shapes or gestalts. So why is this important? Well, gestalt may originate in psychology from primordial impulses, but anything with principles that affect visualization is important to artists. In fact, gestalt is considered important by anybody in a field incorporating visual design, and I'll summarize and define the Gestalt principles and demo them really simply in my little storyboard notebook. Some of them will seem similar to each other as they're all connected thematically. And remember, all of this is based on how our minds naturally form connections, relationships, and wholes, even when there are disparate random elements that we're looking at visually. So the first one is proximity, also called emergence. And that's the notion that we see items that are closer to each other as related groups. So we would consider maybe these 8 circles to be related to each other. And we also see further items as unrelated. So we would consider these 3 items to be unrelated to this group, and also maybe unrelated to each other because they're all far away. And proximity does override how we see a collection of shapes. We colored some of these red and another one red over here. I made some of these into green triangles. Our mind would actually still look at these and say, well, these ones are still put together in a pile, so they're probably more related to each other than these ones that are separate, even though we can see that there are other similarities of shape and color and size, so that's proximity. Then there's similarity, and similarity is also called invariance. And that's the notion that we see elements that are similar in color, form, size, and pattern as sharing some sort of function, and so we automatically sort them together. So if I drew those green circles versus the red circles, I'm automatically sorting in my mind the green circles together sharing some kind of function and the red ones as sharing some kind of function. And so I've sorted them together in what we call regularity. So that basically means we look for differences and similarities and link similar elements together. We can identify similar objects even if they're rotated or skewed. The next principle is enclosure, also referred to as a common region. So maybe I'm thinking that these are related to each other because they're all blue and they're all circles. If I wanted to make some of these seem more common with each other than others, then all I have to do is box some of them off in an enclosure or common region, and suddenly my mind tells me these ones are all sharing the same enclosed space. So that must mean that they have something more in common with each other and they're together for a reason. So this is like proximity, where when you put something closer to each other, you automatically think that it's more related. But this is like the underscored extreme version because you've actually highlighted it by not just putting something together, but by boxing it off somehow. The next principle is closure or reification, also called illusory contours. And that basically means that your mind makes closures and imagines contours or finished shapes, even if you see portions of it and it's not completed. And it's because your mind automatically wants to fill a gap to complete an incomplete shape and see the illusion of a whole shape. Solid shapes are more comforting and knowable than uncertain ones, so your mind automatically fixes and finishes an incomplete visual puzzle. So it doesn't matter that I've drawn these as incomplete. My mind is automatically completing these as a full circle or square or triangle. And this would continue to happen for even a much more complicated shape. And people use that for logos and icons and websites and stuff all the time, where something is partially drawn in and the rest of it isn't drawn in, but you actually fill it up mentally using illusory contours. And then there's continuity. Basically just go with the flow of lines and follow those imagined vectors. So if I have a line here, I'm going to follow the path of it. That's what my eye wants to do. That's what my mind wants to do. Now, even if I create some gaps here in this line, my mind is still going to mentally fill those gaps and follow the line of that imagined vector. And there's something else called common fate, and that's related to continuity. And that means we intuitively group together elements that move in the same direction or trajectory or curve, projecting a relationship between things in a single line or curve. Intuitively grouping together these dots that are in the same trajectory or line. And that's related to connectivity. Another Gestalt term that just refers to us saying that we group together objects that are visually attached to each other in some way. Some circles here, and I connected them with a line. Now I automatically feel like there is some more connection between those circles. And here's one of my favorites, which is called figure ground or multi-stability. Basically the result of quick mental processing of what you think and perceive to be a figure versus a background. So you have these solid shapes that are instinctively created by grouping together shapes and pieces and dots together, and they come to a stable, reversible, or ambiguous visual. And depending how you look at it, it looks like a box. Your eyes will flip the image to be either concave or convex, which is either the box being a diorama shape that is concave and going in, or a full box that's coming out at you that's convex. And another example of that, a candlestick holder or an egg holder, but it'll also look like the profile of two faces nearly touching each other, one on this side and one on this side, based on how we're perceiving it to be either the figure or the ground. One time we see the candlestick as the figure and the white space as the negative ground, and other times we see the face that is the light color background, those are the two faces, and then we put the black spot in as the background, and that's multi-stability. So in this case, this is a reversible visual because you can see it as more than one thing. You can see it as two heads in profile or as this candlestick holder. And this is affected by what I was discussing earlier, and that's convexity. And that is the idea that we perceive convex shapes that come out towards us over concave ones that recede. And that's probably because we are paying more attention to something that's closer to us. And so we typically notice a foreground over a background and positive space over negative space. The next one is focal point or emphasis. And again, a lot of these are overlapping with compositional principles. And that basically means that whatever is distinctive and unique is going to capture our eye first. And we do that all the time in art on purpose, where we deliberately make something darker or brighter or larger or more colorful so it captures our eye first. If I've got that star there, right now there's nothing else here, and it's the focal point. If I did put other things in here and they're smaller, I'll look at the largest, brightest thing first, which is this star. And if I wanted to add even more emphasis to it, I could color the rest of this dark. And now I have size contrast, value contrast, and if I colored it, also color contrast to tell me that this is my focal point or emphasis. And there's prognance, which basically means that we're going to interpret complex or ambiguous shapes as simple ones because that's mentally easier for us. And we want to put a definition, a label on things that we're looking at. So even if something is really complicated or ambiguous, we start to simplify it in our heads. So for example, if I had just a whole lot of scribbles here, and I'm just doing them randomly, I don't know what that is. It's complex, it's ambiguous, doesn't make any sense. But my mind is going to try to make stuff up. Like, is that trees? Maybe this is trees. And I'll just automatically do that in my mind. And that means that my brain is simplifying it for me. And that works really well in art because you can imply. It helps with suggestion. That sometimes just implication or suggestion is enough. So your mind automatically takes something that's complex or even in shadow or vague and blurry into a simple shape. So that might mean a hand in shadow or a foot in shadow or something in the background that's really far away. Your mind will start to put it together and imagine that maybe it's trees or houses or whatever it is that it looks like that's easiest for the mind to process. And then there's familiarity. If something is personally relevant or meaningful to us, we're going to group that together. Based on the other principles, I would automatically be grouping these together based off of similarity because they look like each other, these three. But based on familiarity, I'm going to choose to take the personally relevant and meaningful things, assume that the X's have more in common with each other, and I'll group them together. And I'll sort of ignore something that I don't understand or recognize and just sort of let it recede to the back of my mind and not pay that much attention to it. All right, so next we have symmetry, which again, you should be very familiar with if you are an artist. We're going to look for balance and order in a design, even if it's not there. If I have disparate elements on both sides, my brain automatically wants to tell me that they're both symmetrical to each other and that they actually exist as a pair, one on each side of the page. And that's one of the reasons why when you do try to paint something asymmetrically to get it more attention on its own, that's one of the reasons we do that, to make it into a focal point, is because our brains automatically want to organize stuff so that it is symmetrical. So synchrony is when something, because it appears simultaneously, your eye groups it together. If I had a gray line going through, and then when I clicked on something, I had a dotted line going over that, and when I clicked on it again, it turned into a row of circles, automatically you'd group all those together because they are appearing simultaneously. So even though there would be this separate, the dashes separate, and the circles separate, if I see them on the screen simultaneously, then I would use synchrony to mentally associate them with each other. That'll be easier to see for something that actually moves, like a cartoon or a website that has interactive elements. You can look at this and it just looks like a bunch of random ink blobs, but with the influence of your mental instinct and all of these various principles that I've just gone over, you'll probably say that you see a dog, a Dalmatian to be precise. And that in a nutshell is what Gestalt is seeing something that your mind is telling you see by associating relationships with various disparate things. And now to show you some Gestalt in art, I'd like to briefly survey Clarence Coles Phillips, who lived from 1880 to 1927, and he was an American illustrator. And I'm going to show some examples of his work and then also try to do a quick figural study if I can in my journal's end pages. Phillips died due to a chronic kidney condition at the young age of 47, but he was known for his stylish fadeaway girls with his signature use of negative space in paintings created for magazines like Life, Good Housekeeping, and others. Phillips' first fadeaway girl appeared in the United States in 1908 with clothing that disappeared into the background, yet viewers still filled in that figure mentally. If you were paying attention to the first half of this video, you'll notice that it's the principles of closure and continuity in Phillips' Fadeaway Girls that make them come together. Gestalt was actually not defined until the 1920s in Germany, so Phillips was ahead of that school of thought and worked intuitively with Gestalt principles, as undoubtedly many other artists have blithely and subconsciously done with other layouts and color principles. So Phillips created a novel background technique with simple yet striking design elements that make these images more memorable and unique than if they had been fully rendered in all areas. If you search for Gestalt now online, you'll find so many modern graphic designs and logos and art making use of the same principles that artists like Phillips did subconsciously a century ago. I really think his Fadeaway Girls are super charming, and I'm surprised he's not mentioned when Gestalt is brought up or researched. And I made the connection myself between Gestalt and his work because I was familiar with his work, and I thought when I was reviewing Gestalt, this person is perfect for that. And I hadn't read anything where others were calling his Fadeaway Girls Gestalt art, so I just thought I was glad to make the connection myself, since I think Phillips' artwork is actually much more pleasing than any online logos or website design elements using Gestalt, but I am biased because I'm a traditional artist. A free public post listing the tools and techniques from this video will be on my Patreon. Please like, comment, subscribe, and check out my website dashboard with all my online platform links on one page, including my Skillshare and Patreon, to support my art creation and instruction. And I've recently updated my Redbubble shop for art prints and finally made my Etsy shop active to sell original art there, so I hope you check that out too. So there's my teeny Fadeaway Girl done with teeny color pencils, because they were the only color pencils I own. That hairdo up and everything almost makes her look like a geisha, which is kind of cool too. I think it's really awesome how we can see the folds of the dress because of how the butterflies start and stop. We can see where the ribbon is taking the back of the dress. We can see where her hand is clutching this part of the skirt, so that all of these things where the fan is lying here, where the butterfly is on this bodice, it's giving us a lot of implication as to where her figure actually is. And so our mind mentally uses those Gestalt principles to fill in those gaps and tell us where the dress would be ending instead of me just drawing it in with the ink. Well, wizards, hope you got something out of this discussion of Gestalt and Phillips' Fadeaway Girls and my review of the cute Moleskine Storyboard notebook in this adorable pocket size. Thanks for parking your brushes here and wishing you all epic art adventures.